Hi guys, Patrick here. I just thought I'd create a bit of a walkthrough. Hopefully it's going to be useful. I'm creating a forest because quite a few of you seemed to be interested in painting forests. I'm not going to be using a very limited colour palette. I'm going for a more detailed, modern style of pixel art, the sort of thing that you could use for a background. So first off, I'm creating a much larger, more detailed image than typical for traditional pixel art. I'm using a canvas 500 pixels wide, 245 pixels in height. You can obviously use whatever size you want. So it's good to have something to use as reference. I'm using as inspiration these images of Wistman's Wood in Dartmoor. We're not copying these images, just want to evoke this kind of atmosphere. Okay, so canvas is set up. First thing we're going to do is get rid of the pixel grid, just because it's annoying. Next, using the fill bucket, we're going to colour our canvas. I'm using this purple colour because I want the overall image to have this twilight sort of feel. Now, using the pencil tool, we're going to start blocking in some of the basic shapes. This process is how you'd start any sort of painting, just a basic sketch. We're using the fill bucket tool to fill in shapes as we go. We're going to start putting in trees in the background in a paler colour to create a sense of depth. Now, using the lasso tool, we can cut out and select the area we want for the sky showing through the trees. Using a paintbrush on a low opacity setting, we can put in the sky and it'll appear behind where we want the trees to be. Hopefully that makes sense. Beginning to add more shading to the highlights now, more details. We've shaded the whole tree, just scribbly like, as you would with a normal pencil and paper. Now, if you hold Control and hit L on Windows or Command L on Mac, this will bring up levels and you can adjust the brightness and contrast of the image. I'm going to add a whole lot more contrast to create more depth. Adding some leaves now using a larger brush on a low opacity setting. That's going to create a more painterly feel. Now I've selected the forest floor and once again adjusted the levels, this time to darken the ground. I've selected the right hand side of the image, the direction that light's coming from, and I've brightened that area. Now, if you go to adjustments and using the color balance, I've turned up the red and yellow in the highlights and the blue and green in the shadows. This has added to that evening twilight feel. If you hold Control and hit the U key on Windows, Command U on Mac, you can bring up the saturation and hue. And this is quite a fun setting to play around with. You can shift the whole color palette into a different hue. You can change the saturation or intensity of the color of the whole image. Continuing to tidy and sharpen things up, adding more highlights to the trees, adding areas of block color. So I think the light contrast on the tree is too harsh. The shadows are too dark and the highlights are too bright. So I'm going to select the whole tree using the lasso tool and I'm going to bring up levels, Command L, and I'm going to bring the contrast down and darken the whole tree. Nice. We're going to add a few details, add some more twigs. So this is the midway point. It's the time when the image is all there, but it's a bit boring, it's a bit uninteresting, but we're going to push through this. To add a lot more depth and make it look a bit more interesting, we're going to add some atmospheric effects, mist, lighting effects, and to show you how to do this more easily, I'm just going to bring up another canvas. So what you want to do is set the opacity of your pencil really low. I'm only using an opacity of 5%. And we're going to increase the size of the pencil too. You can use the square brackets as a keyboard shortcut to increase or decrease the size of your pencil. Now, as you paint, you can build up layers of colour, and you can use this technique to create shading, lighting effects, shadows, fog, cloud. You could even import this as a PNG and have the clouds animated in your game. But yeah, that's how I'm adding the mist into this image. Adding more highlights and details to the tree, trying to make it feel more 3D. Adding some details to the foreground. You want your foreground to have a high contrast in colour and tone, and that's going to create your sense of depth. and that's going to bring your foreground into the foreground. So trying to tidy up some of the messy bits. One method of shading I'm using, I'll show you how I'm doing this in a different canvas. So if you go into your brush settings, you can bring up this dialog box. There are a whole load of options here, but if you tick the scattering box and push the scattering right up to 1000%, your pencil will have this rougher finish to it. This is really good for creating pixelated shading, and it's a really good effect for pixel art. Sharpening up some of the rougher lines, we're beginning to add those last few touches now, adding some more details to the foreground, adding some highlights on the side that's facing the light source, just those last finishing touches. Now this is a finished piece. There's certainly a lot more you could do with this in terms of tidying it up, cleaning it up. If you wanted to have a more limited colour palette, you could think about adding some posterizing effects to it. You can scale it up or scale it down, but we're going to leave it here. Hopefully this has been helpful. If people have found this useful, I can do more of these. Make sure you message me if you have any questions or want any feedback. But we'll leave it there. Thanks, guys.